Gibraltar, 1735, 800 troops. In 1735, the British sent for 600 troops from Gibraltar, and with 200 more from Jamaica, they managed to successfully occupy MILTON and scatter the Maroons once again. This would begin the infamous westward migration of the Windward Maroons. Some migrated with Cuffy, others migrated with Accompong. But Queen Nanny and her Maroons would opt to migrate to Cudjoe. Due to a Maroon informant named Cupid, the migration was intercepted and a battle took place on the route. A few Maroons were killed or captured, and some died of hunger during the long march. But they would eventually make it to Cudjoe. Cudjoe would welcome them and allow them to live with him for several months. However, it was not possible to accommodate them any longer without jeopardizing everyone. Cudjoe built his villages in crowds, and the original reason for spreading out the Maroon towns was to create a defense across the island. So it was necessary for Queen Nanny to go back to the east and create another settlement. Historians erroneously cite this as a moment of friction or lack of love between Cudjoe and Nanny, but this is far from the truth, and I'm need for mind them blood clot business. Nannytown had been under British occupation for about 2 weeks before being destroyed and abandoned due to fears and limited supplies. However, the Maroons could not return back to that base, so they began to build other bases, such as Pumpkin Hill. Colonel Guthrie's invasion, 1738. In 1738, the British sent once more for 200 Mosquito Indian trackers to help them discover the location of the Maroon towns in the west. Colonel Guthrie came to the mountains in pursuit of Cudjoe with blacks, mulattoes, white soldiers, and Mosquito Indians. When they came into the clearing, they discovered a group of Maroons working, but they took off into the woods, causing the soldiers to pursue them into an ambush. Despite losing a few officers, they pushed through the ambush until they reached what they thought was a town and occupied it. In truth, these were actually hunters' huts used by the Maroons when they went out to gather meat for extended periods. These huts laid outside the main town, and the goal was to advance on the main town. However, Guthrie had employed the services of certain house Negroes as guides. These guides were Maroon traders who were able to warn them of the ambushes that laid in wait. So they stayed put, and it was at this point that the negotiations and peace talks began, as Guthrie was able to meet who he thought was Cudjoe and discuss the terms. However, Cudjoe was not fooled by his terms and resumed the war with Guthrie. Guthrie then burned the huts and fled for his life with his troops. The Three-Fingered Attack, 1738. In 1738, Cudjoe learned through the slave intelligence network that the British would be launching a massive assault on 3 Maroon towns at the same time in hopes of wiping out the Maroons. They managed to achieve a level of success at the newly established Maroon towns in the east. But at Accompong, they were embarrassed. They had major trouble carrying the heavy guns over the hilly terrain and could not outmaneuver the swift and stealthiness of the Accompong Maroons. So Cudjoe employed the hit-and-run strategy, and the Maroons decimated them. So much so, the colonial government did not keep a record of this particular battle. Peace Cave, 1738. In 1738, under the pretense of peace, the British tried to lure out the Maroons, specifically Cudjoe himself, So Cudjoe would use himself as a bait to lure about 300 soldiers into a cave in a kampong. Cudjoe went through the cave, then sealed the exit. The Maroons were in hiding, counting the steps, and once all the troops made it inside the cave, they gave the signal to come out of hiding and erase from existence all but two of the 100 specially chosen regiment. They never fired a single shot. The two remaining soldiers were brought as prisoners to Cudjoe so they might report back to the British the news of their utter defeat. Cudjoe cut their ears off and told them to tell King George to send more troops next time. King George did indeed reply, saying those were his best troops, and he didn't have any more. And it was at this time that they resolved to make peace with the Maroons. Treaty. After numerous failed negotiations, Cudjoe and the British finally came to an agreement, and peace was made. The treaty was originally a blood pact with a verbal agreement. The agreement was simply that the Maroons will no longer raid the plantations, and the government won't try to enslave the Maroons. They would also defend the island from invasion, as the Spaniards in Cuba had been plotting to retake the island. This was the verbal agreement. However, the British required a written contract signed by Cudjoe, as was their custom, and the Maroons just weren't into that ish. The blood pact was spiritually binding and worth more than a paper. However, when the British brought back an official paper for Cudjoe to sign, Cudjoe noticed that it had extra lines. Knowing he could not read English, they tried to pull a fast one on him and put in extra clause and details he did not agree to. But he bluffed and demanded they changed it. The British were rather underhanded in the peace treaty, as they knew Cudjoe was not fluent in English, especially reading the king's English, knowing that the king was already disappointed that he could not bring the Maroons in as slaves. Instead, he was negotiating with them. So this is why the treaty sounds more like a Maroon surrender than a mutual agreement. It's the equivalent of fan fiction, as they wanted Maroons to be slaves and wasted 80 years and thousands of lives only to sue for peace. This is not the first time the British did this. They also did this in New Zealand, where they have multiple copies of a treaty in one language, and in their language, it says things that were never agreed to by the other party. In fact, they cheated the Maroons out of almost 20,000 acres of land by removing a zero on the quote-unquote official draft of the treaty. What should have been 12,000 and 15,000 became 1,200 and 1,500 acres of land, which has created a land dispute between Jamaica and the Maroons to this day. This is proof positive that the way the contract is written is not exactly what the Maroons agreed to, and that the British altered it to their liking. On the matter of catching runaways, if you read the document, there is clearly an option for becoming a Maroon. In fact, Cudjoe created 2 Maroon towns specifically for this purpose, known as Freeman's Hall. When enslaved people ran away post-treaty, if they could make it to Freeman's Hall, they were off limits. It's also a fact they created, supported, or did not destroy known new runaway settlements. While it is true that some Maroons did act as mercenaries to catch runaways, the insistence that Maroons were slave hunters, as a Rastaman told me in Jamaica, was simply a tactic to divide the Maroons from the rest of the Jamaican people. It's no different than the boogeyman stories they told slaves to convince them to hunt Maroons. Post-treaty. Not everyone was happy with the treaty. In fact, some Maroons wanted to continue the war. Queen Nanny herself wanted to continue, but Queen Nanny was then shot by a black man named Scipio. So yeah, she was like, the hell with it. Cudjoe famously killed himself at this point, refusing to share his blood with the British. But a group of Maroons conspired against Cudjoe and rose up and were immediately put down by Cudjoe. Pole Jocker historians will cite this as Cudjoe displaying his loyalty and twisting the narrative. But this isn't so. He was king, and he had secured peace, and they disobeyed what the king said, and there was only room for one authority. Rowe family. King Cudjoe, like most Akan men, was a polygamist. He had at least 2 to 3 wives, to my knowledge, but not certain how many daughters. It is said that he or his descendants took the last name Rose, which was shortened to Rowe, and was then assimilated to Rowe, R-O-W-E, after becoming acquainted with a white family of planters and church officials who lived near a kampong. Said Rose may have baptized some of my ancestors. The Rowe family is the central family of a kampong, and many chiefs have been Rose owing to the lineage. There's an estimated 7,000 Rowe Maroons, a great deal of them. Cudjoe Pikibo. Death. 5 years after the Maroon War, Cudjoe was in Moortown, and he complained of a chest pain and went inside to go lay down, and never woke up. He was in his 80s when he passed away, and his hair was fully white by then. Legacy. Cudjoe's legacy lives on in his many descendants and the town named after him, Cudjoe. He is buried in Old Town near a kampong, and every January 6th, we welcome the world to join our celebration of Cudjoe's birthday. During the rebellion of 1760, the new Maroons fighting for their freedom cited that they would not stop fighting until the government agreed to a peace treaty, just like Cudjoe. Due to Cudjoe's clause in the treaty, many would continue to run away to places like Freeman's Hall or create their own places like Minosen Yunokum, or even sneak away to a Maroon settlement. Some Maroons outright bought the freedom of people they knew. Even today, Cudjoe's treaty still benefits Jamaicans. Jamaica is still a part of the British Crown. The head of state, as of this video, is little old Charlie. But the head of the sovereign republic of the Maroons is Chief Richard Curry, a direct descendant of Cudjoe. This means Jamaica is not truly independent, but the Maroons are, and Jamaicans have the option to become Maroon citizens and would not be under the Crown's authority. Cudjoe's offer of freedom from the British Crown still stands. But just as back in Cudjoe's days, most Jamaicans would rather stay under the Crown, and they have an irrational hatred for the Maroons because of the treaty that they never read in propaganda. They will tell you Maroons caught Bogle without telling you that Bogle was a Maroon. There are many who are disappointed with Cudjoe seeking peace with the white man, but they neglect to mention Nanny's blood was a part of this treaty as well, and Cudjoe's treaty is the only treaty that explicitly offers amnesty to runaways. Conclusion. While Queen Nanny is recognized as a Jamaican hero, and that she freed many slaves throughout her fantastic exploits, it could be argued that Cudjoe was the mastermind behind most of these tactics, as he had been famous for freeing more enslaved people long before she was known. And had Jamaica been ready, he would have ended slavery in 1734. And it's time Jamaica and the world recognizes the great King Cudjoe of the Maroons. Special thanks to my sources, Maroon Family History, and these 3 books, link in the description. Thank y'all so much for tuning in. Make sure y'all smash that like button, leave your thoughts in the comments section, share the video as it helps the algorithm, and subscribe for more. And if you like this video and want to support this content, then click the super thanks button and donate whatever you feel like, or you can hit me up in the Cash App, link in the description.